Welcome everyone. It's time to answer some Qigong question. Okay, this one is from Mr. Scott Clydale. How you doing, Scott? It says, "Hi, Sifu Adam. Is it too early to ask if you know if you will be offering the Qigong in the new program?" Oh, you asked me that before. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Scott. Yes, I will be teaching the Qigong, but in the new program coming up, which will drop really soon on my website. But I want to talk about the Qigong since you asked me that before on Facebook and on YouTube. So, this idea of the Qigong is a very popular name for many styles of Qigong in and outside of China, in older styles of Qigong, as well as the modern Qigong. So, it's not one particular lineage. Qigong is really common, right? And so it's impossible for me to talk about it from all lineages because I don't know all the lineages. But to generalize it, I hope this will help you. And that is, you can basically look at it from a yin and yang point of view with the Qigong. In all the styles that I've seen, you can basically approach it externally, like working with trees, or you can approach it internally where you are the tree. So I'm going to go through all that. And the first one is working with the tree outside. You basically have the doing practices and the non-doing practice, right? And in the doing practice, I learned this many years ago in medical Qigong. A lot of the stuff that's called modern medical Qigong usually is like an umbrella term for Qigong system that was developed in the communist era around the 1940s. That's actually where the term Qigong came from. Before the communist era in the 1940s, it was never called Qigong. Somebody made that term up in the 1940s. In the old days, this is important when you start training later, it wasn't called Qigong. Anything to do with the standing, moving, and not moving practices for physical vitality was called Yang San Gong in Chinese, which means Yang means to nourish, San means the body, Gong means like Qigong, the word Gong, which also show up in Gong Fu. Gong literally means achievement or skill through effort. So you can't just talk about it, you gotta train, right? That's what the word Gong means. So it's called Yang San Gong. So it's physical vitality, a lot of breathing exercise, a lot of moving, a lot of post-training. And then the sitting stuff, which is really for spirituality and emotional healing, that was called Taoist or Dazhou. Dazhou means to sit, and Taoist literally means Tao skill. So when in the 1940s, in the late 1930s, when the Communist Party was getting into power, they wanted to revolutionize and modernize China. And one of the many things they did was to try to get rid of anything that was spiritual or religious. So Buddhism and Taoism and that kind of stuff was under attack, right? And now they're reviving it. But at that time, they were just trying to destroy it. So anything to do with with the sitting and the spiritual practice was a big no-no. But they wanted to retain a physical vitality. So they end up making the term Qigong, and that's where that word comes from. And I still use that word simply for Google search word and YouTube so people can find my work. But it is not really an accurate way of looking at things since we've been talking so much about meditation, right? So a lot of times when people do Qigong is more for physical vitality. Now, Qigong covers the entire spectrum of everything. If you look at it from the modern area of medical Qigong, which was around the communist era, a lot of their stuff works with trees in terms of external. And that was inherited from Chinese shamanism. So it's kind of funny that that survived and they did not kill it during the revolution. And to give you a brief example, there's many ways to do this. If you were to find a tree you like, you go up to it and put your right hand on it or your left, but usually people use their right hand, and put the other hand in the heart. You'll ask the tree for permission. Is it okay that we work together, right? And if you get a good vibe and a good feeling, you start doing pose training next to the tree, no more than 5 feet away. And one example would be when you breathe in, out from the tree into the top of your head, go through your body into the ground, and from the ground you go back to the tree. So you built a circuit. There's roughly about 30 ways you can do this in different directions of a circuit, but for safety reasons, I'm not going to teach it on the podcast. I'll just stop to give you one example, one circuit. Same thing with asking the tree for permission. There's actually, at least that I know of, 5 more ways to do the rituals, but I'm not going to talk about it on the podcast for safety reasons. So you're doing these circuits. That would be an example of doing practice. It's pretty effective to charge the body if you can do it right, but it usually only works with people that's already been doing post training for a while, at least their first 100 days, and they can already start to feel stuff in their lower center. Because if you have no feeling of the energy in your body, if you try to work with Qi, then with the tree, it's pretty difficult because you can't even feel yourself. So how can you build a circuit, right? So that's the first thing. But providing that you have a pretty good background, at least 90 days or 100 days of consistent post-training, and you're starting to feel the burner, then working with trees in terms of circuit from medical Qigong and other names as a form of tree Qigong is actually a pretty fast way to charge your energy, right? Another way you can do this is more ancient and more simple, and it's the non-doing practice. And as the name implies, you don't do anything. You go up to a place like a forest with a lot of trees, and you simply practice Qigong. Whether you're standing or sitting, but today we'll talk about, for this phase, we'll talk about standing. If you're standing or sitting around a lot of trees, naturally that will affect your immune system, better your emotion, better your brain chemicals, your hormones, and the nerves in your feet. And this has been well documented in the forest bathing therapy that's been studied by modern science of how that affects people in all these layers of the body. What science did not study yet, and I think they probably will in the future, is that being around trees doesn't just better your nervous system, immune system, and the brain chemicals and the nerves in your feet, although that's great. Mystics around the world globally throughout history has figured out intuitively that instead of just a physical body, when you're actually training around trees, naturally, without any effort, the tree has a way to stretch or expand your aura or your field, whatever you want to call it. So it helps open you up, right? You see that in Hinduism, right? Like in the ancient rishis, they talk about training around trees, meditating around trees. Or the Buddha himself, he got enlightened 49 days of sitting under the Bodhi tree. He picked a very specific tree for a reason, right? Or Taoist sages up in the mountains, they're very famous for training around trees, where they say trees have the best Qi. So this, you can see it in different traditions throughout thousands of years. This has been a thing. So that would be an example of non-doing practice, where you just literally practice Qigong around trees. We all intuitively know that will work anyways, right? And science has now documented at least a physical layer. But here's a word of warning from my observation the last 30 plus years, is that the non-doing practice is awesome, but the doing practice, like a circuit that we talked about earlier, I've seen people pass out doing that, right? Because it's a great method, don't get me wrong. But a lot of people have like an ego thing, right? They have a greed thing. So when they do it, they try to force it. That's a problem with most doing practice. It's not the practice themselves that are bad. It's that the person doing it got too much greed and ego. They start forcing it. Sometimes it results in dizziness, lightheadedness, brain fog, pass out, getting really high and suddenly crashing. So these are some of the things I've seen, and that's the reason why I didn't talk about it too much. I just gave one brief example earlier. But I just want to outline how there are 2 ways to work with trees, right? Excluding the rituals. So now I'm going to talk about the second part about the tree Qigong, and that is not working with trees externally, but working with trees internally, like you're the tree. So for example, and this might take a while, leave a comment below if this is kind of confusing, because I'm going to try to walk you through the whole thing. So let's say if you're standing, right? At first, you're just building the container. Very popular in post-calmness area, post-training, where they talk about developing punjing, or the buffer, opening up the space in the body, aligning the bone, dropping it, stretching the fascia, open up the pores, doing your bone breathing, doing your pore breathing, all that stuff, right? And you're posting. Eventually what's going to happen is that you start having a sensation of it sprouting, going to your extremities, going into your aura. That's cool. But if you keep post-training, and you have a pretty good teacher to show you how to do this, in a non-doing tradition, spontaneous movements will start to happen, even when you're not physically moving. When that happens, you'll start doing Qigong in terms of your relationship up and down. Because if you look at the plant or you look at any tree, one of the things you'll realize is the branches is always reaching for the sky, the earth is rooted to the ground. The primary energetic relationship of a tree is vertical, not horizontal. Humans are different. We spend 99.99% of our awareness on a horizontal plane. Chasing money, chasing women, doing kung fu, eating, sleeping, whatever, right? But the spirituality and Qigong is about the vertical plane, 99% of it. So when you're doing Qigong and you start doing spontaneous movement, your connection to up and down will increase. Yeah, unless you're like a skydiver or like you're a pilot or a mountain climber, those are some of the exceptions. Most humans' relationship is horizontal. So when you do Qigong, we're trying to go vertical, right? When you're doing a lot of Qigong, you won't feel that at first, but after a while, when spontaneous movement starts to happen, you'll start reaching up and up and up, and you'll start reaching down, down, and down. In other words, you're being like a tree. That's when you start going, hey, I'm doing tree Qigong, but there's no effort. In fact, if you put effort into reaching up and effort into reaching down, that's a good way to hurt yourself. Just like earlier when we were talking about working with trees. So in a non-doing tradition, we don't do anything, we just post. Posting properly. Maybe in another episode, I'll talk about how to post properly because that'll take a long time. But if you post properly, eventually spontaneous stuff will happen. And that's when the relationship of the vertical gets super enhanced. In essence, you're being like a tree. Okay, so that's one example, right? Second example is when you're doing a moving Qigong. Now, there's many moving Qigong sets around the world. If you just Google Qigong on YouTube, probably 99.99% of the Qigong you see is a movement Qigong, right? Traditionally, movement Qigong is considered a low-level warm-up for not moving practices, okay? So when you do the moving practices, even though 9 times out of 10, these different systems look very different, providing they're from the classical period, which is the Zhou Dynasty and the Qin Dynasty, and not modern Qigong, which is post-Han Dynasty. If it is from a classical ancient period, then all of them, regardless of how they look, no matter how different they look, is primary concern with the vertical relationship that we talked about previously. So when you do a moving Qigong, the same thing I outlined in standing would happen in moving. At first, you're following the set. If the set tells you to do this, you do this. If the set tells you to do that, you do that. If it tells you to go sideways, so you're memorizing movements, you're memorizing breathing patterns, you're memorizing different visualization. And that's cool. But for people that are initiated, there's no such thing as memorizing movements or visualization because that'll be doing. So in a non-doing practice, you simply do the movements, right? You're doing the movements, but what will eventually happen is the same as standing. Spontaneous movement will actually start happening. When that happens, it's the same thing as what I said before in standing. Your relationship to vertical will increase and enhance. When that happens, again, you're being like a tree. So what's the point of being like a tree is to enhance the vertical relationship so you get more nutrients, so to speak, from up and down, uniting into your lower center. So from a Qigong point of view, you get more energy, right? You start reaching for the sky and you start reaching down below. Again, there's no effort. You're not visualizing it. You're not memorizing movement. You could do it like that if you want from a modern Qigong point of view. From an ancient point of view, you want to be real. You want to be authentic. You want to be genuine. You want to be natural. And you want to be organic, which means there's no contriving, no effort, and no pretending, and no acting, and no forcing. These are all safety measures, right? So you want to take a longer time and have things happen naturally than to take a shorter time and force things and pretend something is happening when it's not and you contriving it. This is very important for long-term growth. It's better to take a longer time and develop good skill than to take a shorter time and hurt yourself or have things that only happens if you're super self-conscious. So Qigong is not an exception. And this exact same thing will happen in your sitting. Because when you're sitting, the exact same thing will happen where there's no spontaneous movement. You're mainly working with mental tricks for mindfulness, so you can calm your mind. But later on, that is not true. Later on, you actually start feeling the burner and it'll start sprouting and all the energetic stuff will start to happen, right? When that happens, at first, it's pretty much a vertical line. But later on, what will happen is, again, spontaneous movement while you're sitting. A lot of times when spontaneous movement happen, especially in the New Age retreat industry, they will call it a symptom of awakening, enlightenment. Please don't fall for that, because it's just your body detoxing trauma and you're finally gaining access to the central channel. It's really a beginner's level stuff, right? So don't get greedy and egotistical. That's the number one rule when you do this kind of stuff. Don't get your ego out of the way, right? So maybe not be so much in a hurry to proclaim the enlightenment or some mastery or whatever word people want to use, right? When spontaneous movement happens, it's a gift. Just let it happen. Just ride it out. It'll stop after a few months anyways, right? So once you finish detoxing. So when a spontaneous movement happens, it tends to do this in the top and this in the bottom. Again, you're resembling a tree. That's another reason why I'm mentioning, I'm systematically going through moving, standing, and sitting and telling you why it's been nicknamed Tree Qigong throughout thousands of years, right? So that's another reason. And the very last reason why Tree Qigong is such a big name, even though Qigong is a modern term, is because of one of the highest level. So far, everything I said is pretty low level, right? But one of the highest level in sitting that I talked about previously is where you sit so much. You sit in a non-doing tradition. I can't speak for other traditions. Because in other doing traditions, it's more like internal alchemy or kundalini, where there's a ladder you have to climb. There's different stages you have to pass through. Converting essence into qi, converting qi into spirit, converting spirit into emptiness. Each one might take years. Each one has many mini stages. Each stage has many tricks and techniques and visualization. It's kind of like going to work. You gotta work your way up the corporate ladder kind of thing, right? And that's post-Han Dynasty. In the original Zhou Dynasty, the original Taoism, there was no technique, no method, no stages, no tricks, no endless chasing. Because the spirit of it is Wu Wei. Because the idea of needing more, the idea of chasing was the reason why you have chronic stress and got sick in mind and spirit in the first place. So why repeat that mistake, right? So original Taoism is all about non-doing. It doesn't mean doing is bad, because some people need to do a bunch of doing before they're even ready to do non-doing. But if you do the non-doing practice, then you simply sit, you simply align, you simply relax. When your mind gets still enough and the blood and the energy sync, it goes down to the center, it sprouts up. We talked about this earlier, right? And I'm going through a very general description right now. As you go up the central channel, you go all the way up, you come all the way down. And each time it touches the center, it changes your... in another episode, I'll talk about this because... Yeah, it'll take... Sorry, I apologize. It's just, I don't want to sidetrack from the tree thing. So anyways, as it comes back down and the layers are dissolving, eventually you'll feel like you have no body. Your body drops off. And I talked about that earlier also in my book. It's kind of like flow tank therapy, right? Where people lose consciousness of their body because their nervous system gets so relaxed, their mirror neurons and their spatial awareness shut off for a while. So you dissolve your body. When that happens, you feel your aura or your magnetic field, which is usually the same. Most people feel it as a personality. If you sit long enough, that diverts. So you have an ego death, they call it in psychedelics. Usually when you dissolve, you go up, you see a light. But when you see a light, kind of like what people describe in a near-death experience, right? So when you see a light, you have to come back down. When you come back down, this spot particularly is still connected up, and you come back down and you go down to your body. So this starts to happen. It's a tree. That is why in one of the main scriptures in Internal Alchemy in I think it was Tang Dynasty Taoism, is called The Secret of the Golden Flower. You can look it up in Google. It's one of the main texts of internal alchemy. And I just want to explain how the idea of the tree of life in Christianity or in Greek mythology, or like the secret of the golden flower mythology in Taoism, these things actually weren't mythology. It's a description of what happens when you merge and come back down. Because when the first time that happens, first of all, you probably freak out the first time it happens. It's pretty mind-blowing. It's really bright. But when you come down, eventually you start feeling this shape. And you can't help but notice it's like a tree. So anyways, I hope I answer your questions about this tree thing. It's not as simple as people say, like, I'm going to go learn tree qigong. No, it's more like a paradigm that goes from moving to standing to sitting all the way up to merging. All these things can become like a tree if done properly and if spontaneous movements happen. But talking about this does not work. Does not help. You need to find a teacher that can guide you through how to actually do this. Talking about it and learning how to do something is not the same, right? So would it be offered in my program? Yes. Is it offered in other people's program? I'm sure it is. But I want to remind you, though, that don't try to look at it as a technique or a system. I hope I did an okay job today explaining to you. It's not like that at all. It's an energetic expression, right? And when you get to the point where it's like a tree, even at the most basic level when you're moving, that's when emotional release happens. It's probably one of the best things I ever seen in Qigong in terms of detoxing negative emotion. So this, even at the basic level of movement, because usually when you see people do movement, whether it's Tai Chi or rather it's moving Qigong, there's no spontaneous movement. But when you get to the part of spontaneous movement or tree Qigong, that's when releasing happens. That's extremely good for chronic stress. Like chronic stress disorder would be stuff like anxiety, depression, PTSD. That, depending on how serious you get, we give it different names, right? When it's this bad, we call it stress. When it's this bad, we call it chronic stress. When it's this bad, we call it anxiety disorder. When it's this bad, we call it depression. When it gets really bad, we call it PTSD. We got different names for pretty much a spectrum of the same thing. You're frying your central nervous system with too much tension. There are many ways to release it, but I haven't seen anything as good as tree Qigong. It's not that good for charging energy. Post-training is better for that. But for releasing tension really quickly, moving Qigong in terms of tree Qigong specifically is really good for that. So I hope that helps you with that. But it's not the end-all be-all. It's just one aspect of Qigong. All right. Within the next week, the Qigong program that I've been talking about is going to drop. So if you guys want to get updates, go to the link below and drop in your email. And I hope to see you guys soon there. Have a great week, guys.